The wind carried the dry scent of sagebrush across the Apache man's homestead as he rode home earlier than usual. His heart was weary from weeks of hard work and long battles of survival, but he carried with him the simple comfort of returning to his wife and children. For years he had trusted that the woman he shared his life with was his anchor, his partner in the harshness of the frontier. But that day would unravel his world in ways he never imagined. He dismounted silently, hoping to surprise her, but instead he found himself the one surprised. A man's voice drifted through the open window of his lodge, laughter entwined with the softer sound of his wife's. At first, disbelief gripped him, for his mind could not comprehend what his ears heard. Yet when he pushed open the door, there was no mistaking the truth. The woman he loved had given herself to another. The betrayal struck like an arrow deep in his chest. She tried to speak, excuses tumbling from her lips, but her words meant nothing against the image seared into his memory. He stood motionless, rage and grief storming inside him, but his Apache pride kept him from lowering himself to anger. Instead, he turned and walked out, the weight of betrayal pressing against his shoulders heavier than any burden he had carried before. For days, he did not eat or sleep properly. His people whispered about the scandal, pitying him yet respecting the stoic way he bore the shame. Some told him to take another wife, others urged him to forgive and restore what was broken. But in his heart, forgiveness was impossible. Trust, once shattered, could never be rebuilt. He could fight enemies, endure hunger, and survive storms. But betrayal from the one he loved was a wound deeper than any blade could leave. His children became his sole reason for continuing. He poured his strength into them, teaching his sons to ride, his daughters to gather herbs, and all of them to honor the traditions of their people. Though they never spoke of it, the children felt the silence in their home, the absence of a mother's laughter replaced by a father's unspoken pain. He vowed to protect them fiercely, but along with that vow came another. Never again would he open his heart to a woman. Love had betrayed him once. He would not allow it to betray him again. Seasons passed, and his solitude hardened into habit. He carried himself with dignity, but behind his strong eyes lay the memory of the woman who had broken him. Sometimes at night he would remember her smile, the way she once held his hand, and he would curse himself for longing for something he knew was poisoned. His pride and his bitterness became shields, keeping everyone at a distance. To the outside world, he was a man of strength, an Apache warrior who had endured the worst and lived. But within, he was a man with a broken heart, scarred by the memory of betrayal. The betrayal did not just take away his wife. It took away the part of him that believed in tenderness. He no longer dreamed of companionship. He no longer hoped for the warmth of shared laughter or the comfort of another's touch. Instead, he convinced himself that such things were illusions, fleeting pleasures destined to end in pain. His life would be about survival, his loyalty only to his children and his people. Love, he told himself, was not for him. Yet the spirits had other plans. Fate does not let a heart remain hardened forever. Though he did not know it yet, his vow would soon be tested, and another woman different from the one who betrayed him would cross his path. She would awaken the part of him he thought was dead, forcing him to choose between living in the shadow of his past or stepping into the light of true love. But for now, in this beginning, the Apache man's story was one of loss, silence, and a heart turned to stone. The years following his wife's betrayal moved slowly, like the desert sun crossing a cloudless sky. Each day blended into the next, marked by routine and necessity. The Apache man rose before dawn, preparing for the hard labor of the day mending fences, tending horses, or hunting game for his children. His hands grew calloused, his back strong, but his heart remained closed, locked away behind a wall of silence. Life without companionship forced him to find strength in solitude. While other men gathered around fires, laughing with wives and kin, he sat apart, sharpening his blade or whittling wood into simple shapes. The community respected him, but few dared to intrude on his solitude. His pride was unbroken, yet his eyes carried the shadow of a man who had once been deeply wounded. Women whispered about him, some pitying, others curious. A few even approached him, offering quiet smiles and subtle invitations. But he turned away from them all, for to him, love was nothing more than a dangerous illusion. His children became the center of his world, though he expressed his care in stern, unspoken ways. He taught his sons how to track deer through rocky canyons, how to listen to the wind and read the signs of approaching storms. His daughters he guided in the knowledge of herbs, healing, and fire-keeping, ensuring they would never be helpless. The children often wished their father would smile more, laugh like the other fathers, but they learned to accept his silence as part of who he was. They loved him fiercely, sensing the depth of his devotion even when words were scarce. At night, when the fire burned low and the children slept, the Apache man sat alone beneath the stars. The vast desert stretched before him, silent and eternal, yet it only deepened his loneliness. Sometimes he thought of his wife, not with longing, but with bitterness. The memory of her betrayal haunted him, a constant reminder that trust could be shattered in an instant. He swore never again to risk his heart. Better to live alone in dignity than to open himself to the humiliation of betrayal once more. Seasons passed, each one etching more hardness into his character. He became known as a man of strength, respected in council, admired for his skill in battle, and envied for his endurance. But admiration could not fill the emptiness within him. The children grew older, each year pulling them closer to independence. They would one day form families of their own, leaving him to walk his path alone. He told himself this was how it should be. A warrior did not need softness. A man betrayed did not deserve another chance at love. Yet, in the quiet moments, he sometimes wondered if his heart would always ache, if the emptiness would ever be filled. Despite the bitterness, there were glimpses of tenderness he could not entirely suppress. When his youngest daughter fell ill with fever, he stayed awake for 3 nights, holding a damp cloth to her forehead until her breathing steadied. When his eldest son stumbled in training, he set aside his pride long enough to comfort him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder and whispering words of encouragement. These moments revealed the man he might have been had betrayal not stolen his joy. His children, though aware of his sternness, felt the love he could not put into words. To outsiders, he appeared untouchable, a warrior forged by hardship, beyond the reach of weakness. But deep inside, he was a man still wrestling with sorrow. Though he had vowed never to love again, there remained a quiet, hidden longing he would not admit, not even to himself. He longed for a partner who would stand beside him, not betray him. Someone who would see him not as a hardened warrior, but as a man capable of tenderness. He told himself such a woman did not exist. Still, when he watched couples walking together beneath the moonlight, a part of him ached with envy. The desert has a way of testing every vow, and solitude can only endure so long before fate intervenes. Though he believed his heart would remain locked forever, life had begun preparing a test he could not avoid. A stranger was coming, a woman whose own scars mirrored his, whose presence would stir the parts of his soul he thought were dead. But for now, he remained alone, a man of stone, living for his children, surviving each day with dignity, unaware that change was closer than he imagined. The day the stranger woman crossed into his land, the Apache man did not know his life was about to change. He had risen early, as always, to check the horses grazing near the creek. The summer heat was already pressing down, shimmering across the horizon. He noticed movement in the distance, an unfamiliar figure stumbling along the rocky trail. His hand instinctively tightened on the reins, his warrior's caution alert. Outsiders rarely wandered so close to his homestead, and those who did often brought trouble. The woman was alone. Her dress was torn, dust clung to her hair, and her steps wavered as though she had been walking for days without rest. She carried no weapon, only a small satchel pressed tightly against her chest as though it held her last possession of value. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes tired as they were still held a spark of determination. She was running from something, that much was clear. He watched her for several moments before approaching. His instincts told him to remain distant. Strangers were burdens, and burdens often led to pain. Yet another part of him, buried deep beneath years of solitude, recognized the desperation in her posture. She was not a threat. She was a survivor, fighting to keep moving when the world had tried to break her. When he finally rode closer, she stiffened, her hand instinctively reaching toward the empty place where a weapon might have been. Her voice cracked with weariness, but there was steel in it when she spoke. "I mean no harm. I just need water. If you send me away, I will go." Her words surprised him. Most who came begging clung to pleading tones or half-truths. This woman, despite her exhaustion, carried herself with a kind of dignity that demanded respect. He dismounted and studied her carefully. She looked like she had known suffering, but she had not let it crush her spirit. That alone stirred something in him he had not felt in years, a reluctant spark of admiration. He gave her water without a word. She drank slowly, each sip easing the tremor in her hands. When she lowered the cup, her eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, he felt the weight of her story in that gaze. She had been wounded to not by betrayal like him, perhaps, but by hardship and loss. He did not ask. She did not offer. Yet the silence between them carried an understanding words could not. The children, curious about the stranger, peeked from behind the doorway of their home. His youngest whispered, "Who is she, father?" He had no answer. He only knew that allowing her to remain would test the vow he had sworn long ago. He did not want another woman near his heart, nor near his children, where betrayal could strike again. Yet something about her presence unsettled his resolve. That evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, she sat quietly by the fire. She offered to help with chores in exchange for shelter-gathering wood, preparing food, anything to prove she was no burden. He did not agree outright, but neither did he send her away. His silence was answer enough. Though the first meeting was filled with tension, the Apache man could not deny that she carried a quiet strength unlike others he had known. She did not shrink beneath his stern gaze. She did not beg for pity. Instead, she held herself steady, as though daring the world to test her again. He told himself her stay would be brief, no more than a night or two until she found her path. But deep down, he sensed that fate had woven her into his story for a reason. This woman was not like the one who had betrayed him. She carried scars, yes, but also resilience. And though he did not yet admit it, something about her made him wonder if perhaps the heart he had buried was not as lifeless as he believed. For now, he guarded his silence, unwilling to reveal his thoughts. Yet as he watched her by the firelight, weary but unbroken, he knew one truth: his solitude had been disturbed. The stranger woman had crossed into more than his land. She had stepped into the guarded space of his heart. Whether he welcomed it or not, the first days of the stranger woman's stay were marked by silence. The Apache man spoke little, his words clipped and practical, yet his eyes missed nothing. He watched her closely, not out of cruelty, but out of caution. He had opened his land to her, but not his trust. His children, curious and cautious in equal measure, shadowed her movements, testing her patience with small questions and tentative gestures. To their surprise, she did not bristle under their stares or retreat into herself. Instead, she answered their questions gently. even managing small smiles that warmed the children in ways their father's silence could not. Her first act of usefulness came the morning after her arrival. Without being asked, she rose early and set about gathering firewood. When the children stumbled under the weight of their small bundles, she knelt beside them, teaching them how to balance the sticks against their shoulders. The Apache man observed this quietly from a distance. A part of him bristled at the sight. He did not want her stepping into roles that reminded him of the woman who had betrayed him. Yet another part of him noted the sincerity in her gestures. She sought no reward, no manipulation, only the dignity of contributing. When she offered to help with meals, he nearly refused, pride warring with practicality. But when he returned one evening from tending horses, he found the children gathered around a pot, their faces lit with delight at the simple stew she had prepared. The aroma filled the air, reminding him of a home long gone. His first instinct was anger that she would stir memories he had buried deep, but the laughter of his children tempered his reaction. That night, for the first time in years, the air around the fire felt less heavy, less hollow. Gradually, necessity forced him to rely on her. A sudden storm broke across the desert, tearing branches from trees and threatening to flood the creek. She worked alongside him and the children, hauling stones to strengthen the banks, her hands blistered yet steady. He had expected her to falter, to complain, but she did neither. When the work was done, she collapsed in exhaustion, mud streaking her cheeks, and he found himself silently respecting her endurance. She was not fragile, as he had assumed. She was forged by hardship, just as he was. The children began to gravitate toward her in ways that unsettled him. His youngest daughter sought her comfort at night, crawling into her arms when nightmares woke her. His eldest son asked her questions about the world beyond their valley, eager for stories of towns, rivers, and mountains. The Apache man wrestled with unease. He feared they might grow too attached, that their hearts might suffer when she inevitably left. Yet watching the children's joy stirred something he had long suppressed, a yearning for warmth, for laughter, for the simple harmony of shared companionship. Despite the growing bond, he kept his distance. His words to her were still sharp, his gaze still guarded. At times he caught himself studying her face when she thought no one watched. There was beauty in her features, but not the kind that lured or deceived. Hers was the beauty of resilience, lines carved by struggle, eyes sharpened by survival. She reminded him of the land itself, scarred, harsh, yet undeniably alive. One evening, as the fire crackled low, she spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of her own story. She told him she had lost everything to violence, her family, her home, even her sense of belonging. She had fled with nothing but determination to survive. He listened in silence, offering no comfort, yet her words lingered long after she fell asleep. Her pain mirrored his own in ways that unsettled him, as though fate had woven two broken lives into the same thread. In the days that followed, their bond strengthened, not through grand gestures, but through the rhythm of daily survival. He still told himself it was temporary, that her presence was a passing storm. But deep inside, the walls around his heart had begun to crack, not from weakness, but from the steady persistence of shared hardship and quiet understanding. Though he would not admit it not yet, he no longer saw her as just a stranger. She was becoming something more, a companion in labor, a comfort to his children, and a mirror of the scars he carried. And in the stillness of the desert nights, when her laughter mingled with the firelight, he felt the faintest stirrings of something he thought he had buried forever: hope. Peace never lasts long in a land as harsh as the frontier. Just when the Apache man began to grow accustomed to the stranger woman's presence, her quiet laughter, her steady hands, the way she eased the children's hearts, the past returned to claw at him once more. It came not with a storm or a raid, but with whispers carried on the lips of travelers passing through. One afternoon, While trading pelts at a nearby settlement, he overheard two men speaking carelessly near the stables. They spoke of a woman he once knew well, his former wife. She was living in a distant town now, remarried to a drifter who spent his earnings at the saloon. The men laughed at the mention of her, saying she still carried the same restless hunger that had driven her to betrayal. Their words were mocking, but to him they cut deeper than any blade. Though he had built a wall of silence around his heart, the memory of her faithlessness returned fresh and raw, stirring old wounds he thought time had buried. That night he sat apart from the fire, staring into the embers as his children and the woman laughed quietly nearby. He did not join them. Instead, he let the poison of old memories seep through him. Every smile the woman gave reminded him of the betrayal he had once suffered. Every act of kindness made him fear the same ending, that trust would again be broken, that his children's fragile joy would once more collapse into silence. He had sworn never to open his heart again, and now he felt foolish for even allowing the possibility. The stranger woman sensed his distance. She asked no questions, but her eyes followed him with quiet concern. When he avoided her gaze, she busied herself with the children, refusing to press him but refusing also to retreat into silence. Her presence remained steady, and that constancy both comforted and tormented him. He wanted to believe she was different, yet the echoes of his wife's betrayal thundered too loudly in his mind. Days later, the whispers reached even closer. A neighbor passing through remarked idly to the children, "Your mother's name is spoken in the towns. She lives not far from here, you know." The children turned to their father, confusion etched across their faces. For years they had lived without asking where their mother had gone, accepting her absence with the quiet endurance of children who learn too young about loss. But the mention reopened questions they had long buried. That evening, his eldest son asked softly, "Father, will she ever come back?" The Apache man had no answer. His silence was enough to tell the boy the truth. The woman watched this struggle unfold and felt the weight of his pain, though he never spoke of it. She had lived through betrayal of a different kind, the loss of family, the cruelty of men who had left her with nothing. She understood the fear that bound him, the mistrust that shadowed every step he took toward her. But understanding did not ease the distance that grew between them. For the first time since she arrived, she wondered if he would ever allow her into the space his wife had once destroyed. Then came a night when the past confronted him more directly. Returning late from scouting the far ridge, he found a rider waiting near his homestead. It was a man from the settlement, one who had known his wife in her new life. The man, drunk and careless, laughed as he spoke of her. "She's no different now than she was then," he sneered. "Always looking for someone to warm her bed. You're better off without her, but everyone knows she broke you." The Apache man's fists tightened, but he did not strike. His silence was weapon enough, yet inside he burned with humiliation. Those words, heard by his children and the woman standing in the doorway, stripped him of the dignity he had fought so hard to maintain. That night, he turned his back on them all, retreating into the darkness like a wounded animal. The stranger woman did not follow. She understood that some battles must be faced alone. Yet her heart ached, for she had begun to see how deeply his scars ran, how tightly his past still chained him. She wanted to tell him he was not broken, that betrayal did not define him. But she knew the time had not come. All she could do was remain by his side, waiting for the moment when he would decide whether to live in the shadow of his past or step into the possibility of something new. Return of his wife's memory had reopened every wound, threatening to undo the fragile bond he and the woman were building. For now, the question loomed heavy in the air. Would he choose bitterness, or allow himself to believe that love could be different this time? The weeks after the whispers of his former wife were heavy with silence. The Apache man retreated into himself, his words fewer than ever, his gaze distant. The stranger woman, however, did not waver. She tended to the children, mended clothes, kept the fire burning, and shouldered tasks without complaint. Though she longed for a sign of trust from him, she did not demand it. Instead, she lived each day with steady hands and quiet strength, as though waiting for the land itself to speak for her. The trial came suddenly, without warning. A band of riders-drifters with greed in their eyes descended on the homestead while the Apache man was away hunting. The children were playing near the creek when the men appeared, their laughter breaking into screams as the riders closed in. The woman, alone with them, had no weapon save a small knife. Yet in that moment she did not falter. She gathered the children behind her, planting herself firmly between them and the strangers. The men jeered, amused by her defiance. One reached to shove her aside, but she slashed at his arm, drawing blood. Rage replaced laughter. They threatened to burn the place to the ground, but her unyielding stance gave them pause. With sharp words, she warned them that the Apache warrior would return soon, and when he did, they would pay with their lives. Her voice carried such conviction that even the hardened men hesitated. After a tense standoff, they retreated, muttering curses, unwilling to test the wrath of the man whose reputation they knew well. When the Apache man returned, he found his children shaken but unharmed, their eyes wide with awe as they recounted how she had stood unyielding in his absence. At first, he said nothing, listening in silence as they clung to her, their gratitude spilling in rapid words. The woman, exhausted but unbowed, met his gaze across the fire that night. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly see her, not just as a wanderer who had crossed into his life, but as a guardian who had chosen to risk everything for his children. Her loyalty was tested again when illness struck his eldest son. Fever consumed the boy, his strength dwindling despite herbs and remedies. The Apache man, desperate, sat by his son's side, his stoic mask breaking as he whispered prayers to the spirits. The woman refused to leave. She tended to the boy with tireless care, cooling his brow, coaxing him to drink water, and keeping vigil through sleepless nights. Her hands never wavered, her voice never lost its calm. When at last the fever broke and the boy stirred, it was her gentle touch he clung to. The Apache man watched in silence, his heart torn between gratitude and fear. Gratitude, because she had saved his child. Fear, because the bond she was weaving with his children was stronger than he had expected. It was the kind of bond that could not be easily severed. And he, scarred by betrayal, feared what it would mean if she too chose to leave, or worse, if she one day hurt them as his wife had hurt him. But unlike his wife, the stranger woman did not seek comfort for herself. She asked for nothing, no promise of belonging, no reward for her devotion. She simply gave of her strength, her patience, her love for children who were not hers by blood. This quiet, selfless loyalty unsettled him more than betrayal ever had. He knew how to harden his heart against deceit, but he did not know how to protect himself from genuine devotion. One evening, after the boy's recovery, his youngest daughter climbed into the woman's lap and whispered, "You stayed. You didn't leave us." The word struck him like an arrow. He realized then that his children saw her not as a guest, but as part of their home. His pride urged him to resist, to remind them she was only passing through. Yet his heart, scarred though it was, recognized the truth. This woman was proving herself in ways his wife never had. Her trials had shown her loyalty not through promises, but through sacrifice. She had stood in the face of danger, tended the sick with unwavering patience, and given herself wholly to their survival. For the Apache man, this loyalty was both terrifying and undeniable. It forced him to confront the possibility that love could exist without betrayal, that devotion could endure without condition. Still, he hesitated. The memory of his wife's treachery lingered like a shadow. But even as he fought it, another truth whispered within him. The stranger woman's loyalty was real, and his heart, though wounded, could no longer ignore it. The days that followed were filled with a silence heavier than before, not because of distance, but because of turmoil within the Apache man's heart. Outwardly, he lived as he always had, working the land, training his sons, ensuring his daughters were safe and skilled. Yet inside, he carried a storm he could not name. The stranger woman's loyalty had unsettled everything he thought he knew. He had believed his heart was buried, yet she had awakened something long dormant, the dangerous longing for companionship. Each night, as he sat by the fire, he found his gaze drawn to her. She spoke softly to the children, her laughter mingling with the crackle of flames, filling the home with a warmth it had lacked for years. He told himself not to listen, not to be moved, but his heart betrayed him. He remembered nights long ago when he had known such warmth, before betrayal poisoned it. That memory was a knife reminding him how easily love could be shattered. The thought of risking that pain again made his chest tighten with dread. When he closed his eyes at night, the struggle deepened. His dreams alternated between two worlds, one where he embraced her, allowing himself to love again, and another where he watched her walk away, leaving his children in tears and his heart in ruins. He woke from such dreams with his fists clenched, sweat on his brow, furious at himself for even imagining such things. Love, he told himself, was weakness. Yet even as he repeated this vow, his heart whispered otherwise. The children did not share his restraint. They had already given their hearts to her. His eldest son sought her counsel as often as his own, asking for guidance when his confidence faltered. His youngest daughter clung to her hand when storms rolled across the desert sky. They saw in her not just a protector, but a mother, something they had longed for silently. Their bond with her grew daily, and it frightened him. If she ever left, their wounds would be deeper than his own had been. He could endure pain. He had proven that. But his children, he could not bear to see them broken. One evening, when the children were asleep, she joined him by the fire. The night was quiet, the stars burning bright above them. For a long time, they sat without words. Then she spoke, her voice steady but gentle. "You don't have to fear me," she said. "I am not her." The words struck him like thunder. His jaw tightened, and for a long moment he could not reply. She had named the truth he carried in silence, the shadow of his wife that haunted every step he took. Finally, he answered, his voice rough. "Betrayal comes when you least expect it. I will not open the door again." Her gaze did not waver. "Perhaps, but not everyone who enters your life comes to break it. Some of us come to stay." He turned from her then, unable to meet the truth in her eyes. Her presence stirred both yearning and fear, and he did not yet know which would prevail. That night, he sat awake long after she slept, staring at the stars and wrestling with himself. The wisdom of his people echoed in his mind, elders who had once said that a warrior must not let the wounds of the past blind him to the blessings of the present. Yet he had lived so long with bitterness that letting go felt impossible. Still, the words of the woman lingered, weaving through his thoughts like threads of hope he dared not grasp. As the days passed, his struggle grew sharper. He found himself searching for her presence, listening for her voice, noticing the gentleness of her touch when she tended the children. Each detail pulled him closer to the edge of surrender. Yet each time, the memory of betrayal rose like a wall, blocking him, warning him. His heart wanted to leap, but his pride held him back. The Apache man was caught between two truths, the safety of solitude and the risk of love. His scars urged him to remain silent, untouched, unbroken again. But his soul, weary of loneliness, whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, love could be different this time. The battle raged within him, unseen by the world but consuming him day by day. And though he did not yet know which side would win, one truth had already become clear. The woman had reached into his heart, and nothing could ever return it to the silence it once knew. The fragile balance in the Apache man's world was shattered one night when danger returned to his land. The desert was quiet, the children already sleeping when the horses stirred uneasily in the corral. The Apache man, who had learned long ago to trust the instincts of animals, rose at once, hand reaching for the rifle at his side. He moved silently across the yard, every sense sharpened. The moonlight spilled silver across the earth, outlining shadows too large to be his own. Then he saw them 3 riders at the edge of the canyon, watching. They were not neighbors. Their posture spoke of hunger, not peace. Rustlers, perhaps, or worse. The woman appeared behind him, barefoot, her face pale in the moonlight. "What is it?" she whispered. "Trouble," he answered. His voice was calm, but she saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers gripped the rifle like an old friend. Without waiting, she slipped back inside, returning with his revolver, which she handed to him wordlessly. He glanced at her, surprised by her composure. Most women he had known would have screamed, hidden, or clung to him in fear. But she stood steady, ready, as if danger itself could not shake her. In that moment, he felt a surge of reluctant admiration. The riders began to move closer, slow and deliberate, testing the strength of the land they approached. The Apache man's children slept unaware, their safety now balanced on his skill and resolve. He knew he could fight, but 3 against 1 was no easy measure. Then, to his astonishment, the woman fetched a bow from the wall, strung it with sure hands, and notched an arrow. Her movements were practiced, not hesitant. He stared for a moment, wondering what past she carried that gave her such readiness. "You've handled a bow before?" he asked, half incredulous. She met his gaze evenly. "I've handled worse." The riders drew nearer, their voices carrying across the desert wind-ugly laughter, boasting, the sound of men who thought the night was theirs. When one of them dismounted, heading toward the corral, the Apache man raised his rifle and fired a warning shot. The bullet struck the dirt near the man's boots, sending up a plume of dust. "Leave," the Apache shouted into the darkness, his voice carrying like thunder. "This land is not yours." For a moment, silence. Then the intruders laughed again, more cautious this time. They were not accustomed to resistance, it seemed. One of them muttered something too distant to catch, and the trio turned their horses, retreating into the shadows. The Apache man lowered his rifle but did not relax. He knew men like that, they would be back. Still, the immediate danger had passed, and the night grew quiet again. He turned to find the woman standing steady, bow still in hand, her breath calm. She had not flinched, not once. His eyes lingered on her, searching. "Why did you stay?" he asked, his voice low. "Most would have run." She gave a small, almost sad smile. "Because this is my place now." "With you?" "With them. If danger comes, I stand here." The words pierced deeper than he expected. For years he had believed no one would stand with him again, not after betrayal, not after the hollowing out of his heart. Yet here was this woman, a stranger who had become family in the eyes of his children, claiming loyalty without fear. Something shifted inside him. The wall he had built, stone by stone, cracked under the weight of her courage. He still feared what love could cost, but in that moment he saw that trust could also bring strength. For the first time in years, he was not fighting alone. That night, as they sat by the fire once more, the silence between them was different. Not heavy, but alive like the air after a storm has passed, when the world feels new. He did not speak his feelings, not yet, but his heart whispered a truth he could no longer deny. She had already changed everything. And though danger still lingered beyond the horizon, he knew now that together they were stronger. The turning point had come, and nothing, neither fear nor memory, would erase what had been forged in fire and moonlight. The days after the midnight threat were different. The Apache man still rose early, still worked the land with calloused hands, but there was a change in his silence. It was no longer the silence of distance, but of wrestling, of a man standing at the edge of something he both feared and longed for. The children sensed it too. They saw how their father's gaze lingered on the woman a heartbeat longer than before. They noticed how his voice softened when he spoke to her, how the lines of strain around his eyes eased when she smiled. Children, who had already given their hearts to her, began to hope that perhaps their father would do the same. One evening, as the sun bled red across the desert sky, the Apache man took the horses to water. She followed, carrying a bucket, her skirts brushing the earth. For a while they worked side by side, their movements quiet, steady. But when the horses settled and the world grew still, he turned to her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes carried the weight of something long held back. "I was not meant to feel again," he said at last. His voice was low, almost rough, like gravel dragged across stone. She stilled, the bucket in her hands forgotten. "And yet you do," she replied gently. He let out a long breath, his chest tightening as if each word was a battle. "I loved once. I trusted once. And I was betrayed so deeply that it hollowed me. For years I thought my heart was dead. But you," he faltered, his jaw tightening, "you make me question what I swore I'd never risk again." The wind stirred around them, carrying the scent of sage and dust. She set the bucket aside and stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "I am not her. I will never be her." He studied her face in the fading light, every line of it etched into his memory. He wanted to believe. The warrior in him demanded caution, but the man-lonely yearning ached for surrender. Slowly, as if it cost him everything, he raised his hand and touched her cheek. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was trembling, uncertain. "This heart has known war and betrayal," he whispered. "But it cannot ignore you any longer." Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry. Instead, she placed her hand over his, pressing it against her skin. "Then let it be known," she said. "I will not betray what we begin here." The weight between them broke then. He drew her closer, his breath mingling with hers, and for the first time since his wife's betrayal, he kissed a woman not out of passion alone, but out of trust. It was not a desperate kiss, but a quiet one, steady, as though he was testing the strength of something fragile. Yet in that kiss, years of silence and pain crumbled. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice unsteady. "This is not easy for me. Fear still lingers. But I would rather risk pain than live without what I feel for you." She smiled faintly, her hand brushing against his chest where his heart beat strong. "Then we will walk this path together, no matter what shadows remain." That night, the fire in their home seemed to burn brighter. The children, sensing something had shifted, clung to her with joy, as though they knew without words that she was no longer a guest but something more. The Apache man said little, but his presence spoke louder than words. His hand brushed hers when she passed the bread. His gaze softened when their eyes met. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to rest, not as a warrior guarding his heart, but as a man beginning to love again. It was fragile, new, still shadowed by fear, but it was real. And though he knew storms would come, he also knew this truth. The kiss they had shared had bound them in a way betrayal could not undo. His past had scarred him, yes, but it no longer held him captive. Something stronger had taken its place. The desert had a way of testing those who lived upon it. Just when peace seemed near, the horizon darkened once again. Word came from a neighbor that the riders who had threatened the ranch were gathering in greater numbers. This time, they meant to strike. The Apache man stood before his home, rifle in hand, gazing at the horizon with the calm of one who had faced death before. He had known this moment would come. Danger always found him, it was the way of the frontier. Yet now, the stakes were different. His children were not his only concern. The woman who had given her heart to him stood within these walls, and the thought of losing her filled him with a fear sharper than any blade. When he told her of the coming fight, she did not flinch. "Then we will face them together," she said simply. He shook his head. "You and the children must flee. Take the north trail." "I will hold them." But she stepped close, her eyes fierce. "Do not ask me to run. I have already chosen my place beside you." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of choice. Then the Apache man felt something break inside him, not a wall, but the last chain of fear he had carried. She was not his past, she was his future. And if the battle was to be his last, he wanted her by his side, not gone from his reach. The riders came at dusk, shadows against the fire-streaked sky. Gunfire erupted, shouts tearing through the air. The Apache man fought like the warrior he was, his rifle cracking with deadly precision. The woman, steady and unshaken, loosed arrows, with skill that startled even him, felling men who thought her an easy mark. Together, they fought as one. Her courage matched his strength, her loyalty bound to his resolve. At last, when the dust cleared and the attackers fled broken into the night, the ranch stood battered but unclaimed. The children emerged from their hiding place, running into their father's arms. He held them tight, his chest heaving, then turned to the woman who had stood unyielding at his side. She was bruised, streaked with dust, but her eyes burned bright with life. He stepped toward her, the world narrowing to the space between them. "You were right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not everyone comes to leave. Some come to stay." Her lips trembled, but she smiled. "And I am not leaving." The Apache man cupped her face in his hands, his touch no longer hesitant, but certain. He kissed her then deeply, fully, no longer held back by fear or memory. This was not a kiss stolen in hesitation, but one freely given, the final surrender of a heart that had fought too long against itself. The children watched from the doorway, their faces alight with joy, for they knew without words what this moment meant. Their father, once shadowed and distant, had found the courage to love again. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "This is my final kiss," he whispered. "Not because it is the last, but because it is the truest. It is the one I choose freely, with all that I am." She closed her eyes, her hand covering his. "And it is the one I will carry forever." That night, as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled above, the Apache man lay awake not in sorrow or fear, but in peace. He had faced his past, and he had chosen love. Betrayal no longer defined him. Loneliness no longer chained him. His heart, once broken, now beat with purpose again. And as the desert wind whispered through the canyons, it carried with it the truth of his journey. Even the most wounded soul can find healing if it dares to love once more.